Welcome to the Blue Yonder Overland podcast. I'm your host, Jen, and I'm so excited to welcome you to our 17th episode today. This podcast is all about how to help you get more adventure into your life, however that looks for you, but especially to make overlanding more approachable. Each week, we feature tips and tricks for vehicle-based adventures, as well as interviews with folks that are doing it. We always post show notes and any behind-the-scenes links or links to places or products we mention over at the website blueyonder-adventures.com, as well as links to folks that I interview and people to follow over on Blue Yonder Jen at Instagram or Threads. For today's episode, we're going to dive into the topic of finding community in overlanding, but also talk about finding community for any of your adventures and hobbies just in general. And so be thinking about it both from a learning perspective, but also just feeling connected, supported, and encouraged to go deeper into these adventurous pursuits. Hey friends, today we're going to dive into the topic of community as it relates to overlanding and adventurous pursuits in general. And it's a little bit of a funny topic, I think, to dive into because part of the allure for getting outside for outdoor adventures, whether it's hiking or camping, at least for me, is escaping people and finding places of solitude, enjoying a walk in the woods by myself where I can just hear the sounds of silence, the wind rustling through the pine trees, the birds, or just stop to notice those little moments in nature that you don't notice when you're busy talking or with people. That's my favorite moment along the journey or along the trip, the camping trip, the hike, whatever. And those are the moments that I'm trying to maximize usually when we're out overlanding as well. So I will take, as I discussed on our last episode with my friend Michael, and her preference for choosing the secluded campsite, even if it's maybe less of a stunning, beautiful vista view. I am the same way, where I will opt for a less good view if it means less people around. So in that sense, it might be surprising to hear me talk about community, but all of us need community, no matter how much of an introvert we may be. And it's something that I've been thinking a lot about this spring as we had a series of different events unfold that led us to moving back to the house that we own in Kingston, Washington, a little earlier than planned, and really jump-started my thinking on what sort of community we were coming back into and what sort of community I wanted to be a part of building. Because there's always so many opportunities to be involved, whether it's in person, online, in any sport or activity that you get involved in, any place you move, there's tons of things pulling at your time and attention. And I realized from our first time around living in Kingston that in Kingston, especially because it's an unincorporated town in Kitsap County, everything is run by volunteers. So there's no shortage of volunteer activities to get involved in, things to do, and people to meet that way. But I realized if I wasn't careful, I could fill up all my time and be quite burnt out on volunteer activities without really thinking too strategically about what type of community I wanted to build. So it was something that I've been spending a lot of time thinking about as we move back this time and where I wanted to focus energy. And no surprise, it's for me really coming down to an outdoors focused community. So how can I encourage healthy outdoor active lifestyles in this community that we live in and connecting with other people trying to live that same way? So I'm looking at things like trail groups, folks that are either building trails, maintaining trails that we have, and access to public open spaces, parks, and the outdoors. And then also trying to think about how folks that enjoy those activities are currently connecting with each other. So in light of all this, it's easy to apply some of these same questions and thinking to overlanding. even though feel like in many ways I haven't been as much a part of the overlanding community as other folks have. We heard from one of my podcast guests earlier in the season, Alex Hager, who also happens to be my sister-in-law, the community that she has found in overlanding, even as a solo traveler, but she's been able to find an overland community in Southern California to go out on adventures with. And it was really cool to hear some of the benefits of going out with a group like that, including the willingness to try slightly more adventurous or risky trails, or finding new places, or just the sharing of skills and knowledge beyond yourself. That was really, really cool to hear about. So that's a bit about why I think this topic is so important to dive into. But now, how are we going to approach it today? As we unpack this topic of community, I'm going to break it down from several different directions, thinking about the full spectrum of online, in-person, and event-based communities and some of the benefits of each type of those things, as well as thinking about your goals in finding community and how that might help guide you to a better community for what fits your needs at that time. And also thinking about learning and also providing examples along the way of where I've seen community in action working really well. I'll also use some of those examples as well as my own reflections in thinking about how to start a new community if you see there's a big gap, or just how to improve the communities that you do find to better fit your needs and be welcoming for new folks joining the space. So first of all, when thinking about the overlanding community, my question is, what kind of community are you looking for? Are you looking for people to actively go out on adventures with? Are you looking for people to learn from? And do you need it to be in person, or would you also benefit from an online community? Would it be something that you would maybe meet up with for special events, maybe once a month, once a year? Think about the frequency of timing that you would want to engage with this community. An ongoing community that you're around day in, week out is a lot different than feeling a part of a community that meets more infrequently, or maybe you see a couple times a year. And I think no matter where you fall on the introvert-extrovert spectrum, it's really nice to feel like a part of a community, even if it's a one-time event. And this is something I really saw myself when I went to Overland Expo SoCal. It's the first Southern California Overland Expo that they had held. And it was also my first time at an Overland Expo, even though I was familiar with the series of events. And I have to say, I was a bit skeptical going into an event that large and wondering if I would feel a bit like an imposter, and wondering if I would connect with anybody, and wondering if it was going to be more focused on selling me things or really celebrating overlanding. And the first thing I did when I downloaded the app and figured out the schedule that goes along with Overland Expo, and I'm sure if any of you have been to large events over the last few years, just seeing the growth of apps or specific event websites that kind of go along with it and really trying to bridge the digital and physical worlds has been kind of a cool addition. I always roll my eyes at having to download another app, but in this case, it really was cool because you could build out your own agenda. You could see a map of where everyone was. You could look up the registered vendors or groups that were going to be there if you wanted to check out any specific types of gear. And it was really useful for just keeping track of the day's events, schedule, and map. And so one of the first things that I came across as I was thinking about how to maximize my time on site was a couple events specifically geared for women. And so I talked a little bit about this on an earlier episode with Azure O'Neill, who's actually the director of programming for Overland Expo, and her vision in putting together some events. This one was a networking one focused on women in overlanding and giving them a space to connect and ask questions, learn from each other in ways that are a little bit more specific to some of the hurdles that women face. one of the things she pointed out as a really good example was just in the realm of vehicle fixes or recovery, where you have to think a little more strategically about how to leverage your body weight if you're a shorter or smaller person. Not that you have to be a woman, just that you probably tend to have those characteristics if you are. And so she was doing a great job of trying to create a welcoming space right off the bat. And so this happened on a Saturday morning of the weekend long event. And that was a really good way to break the ice and sort of meet other women there. And then there was opportunities if you wanted to go around the event with a group, depending on what your interests were, you could self-select into a little tour group that would walk around for an hour or two and check out some specific vendors based on what your interests were. There was also a whole slate of classes and demonstrations throughout the weekend. And so that was an area where I was really interested to see what was on offer, is just where I could learn and up level. And so went to one of the classes there, focused on food storage and prep for longer expeditions, and got some good tips out of that. But I was really encouraged by the fact that just choosing to go to one of the events that the event organizers had specifically set up at the beginning as a networking and welcoming event, it actually worked. It really did help break the ice and make me feel like I was invited into this space. And it broke down some of the barriers to connection by forcing us to sit at tables with other people, playing a little game of bingo, hearing from some speakers, and being given an option to do additional follow-up community activities. So I would say, just as a way of encouragement, that you shouldn't overlook one-time events or yearly events or events that happen infrequently as still a good way of finding community and feeling connected to a broader community, enjoying the thing that you're doing, whether it's overlanding or something else. I think there's a huge value in those types of events. I will say it's a different type of value than sustaining you and encouraging you in sort of a day-to-day basis. And I think that question is going to be a little bit different for everybody in terms of what support they need on a day-to-day, week-to-week basis to make the decisions that they need to prioritize adventures in their life. So as you think about your adventurous community and what might help sustain you, even if you don't have an in-person adventure community, one way is simply to find other folks online or maybe podcasts such as this one to help encourage you. I mentioned a week or two ago discovering Allison Boyle and her community online, She Dreams of Alpine, which is a website, and they run several different programs off of that. But she also has a podcast and talks about adventurous reinvention of your life. And I have found her podcast to be so inspiring and really helps kind of get my creative juices flowing if I feel a little bit of a need for an encouragement that week. And I like to notice what effect different things have on me, whether it's listening to podcasts, music, books, going to a coffee shop, just noticing how I feel after an experience and what it encourages me to do. And one thing I noticed about Allison Boyle's podcast was that I felt energized afterwards to go and do an afternoon hike or a run, engage with the outdoors in some way. And I love when I find things that have that effect on me, just taking note of them and seeing, okay, maybe this is something that I should build into my weekly schedule, or maybe this is something I need to remember to come back to or subscribe to or put on my calendar. And I think online, specifically in social media apps, it can be really easy to get sucked into scrolling and wasting time. But when used in short doses and deciding what exactly you want to get out of the interaction, it can also be beneficial to encouraging your outdoorsy and adventurous goals. There's also a lot of classes, videos, all sorts of really cool educational content. So that's another aspect of community that we haven't really talked about. But in addition to thinking about how often you want community, what sort of rhythm of interaction you want with these folks. The other thing to think about is what your goal is in finding community. Is it really about connection? Is it about learning? What are you hoping to get out of it? And so if it is learning, then again, there's all sorts of resources that you might want to consider, and thinking about how you learn best, I think, is a good place to start. So learning by doing something, by practicing a skill, might mean that you want to look at a day trip or a week long or weekend workshop. And there's all sorts of really cool things in the space for overlanding and adventuring. I'm looking at some right now for off-road motorcycling and ways that I could level up in that area, because I've only ever ridden my motorcycle on pavement. But I think that would be a really cool introduction and help break down, for me, some of the barriers to entry there. So I'm kind of looking at maybe a weekend or a class as a way of finding community, finding encouragement, but also learning. And obviously, there's a lot of good learning out there as well on YouTube, places like that. I think, like I said, it also takes discipline, though, to engage with things in that format, just because it's so easy to get pulled down rabbit holes by an algorithm into places that maybe aren't serving you as well. And that's where there are some different cohorts of different adventurers and communities online that try to have a slightly more structured way of thinking about community. And Alison Boyle, again, going back to her She Dreams of Alpine Endeavors, she has a whole sort of online class and workshops around becoming a backpacker and sort of breaking down skills, but also mental barriers to that. And something like that, I think, is really helpful if you can't find community around you, but you still want to pursue this new skill or activity and want to have a sense of other people being on that journey with you and learning and being able to exchange information, share mistakes along the way. I have found Meetup. Meetup is both a website and an app, to be a really great way of finding some of these types of communities, both when I first moved to Seattle, but also I've been looking to see what's available here in the Kingston and Kitsap Peninsula area as I moved home, and finding that there are some online groups. Facebook groups is another one. I think that has its own particular demographic audience. And Google Groups is actually one that I saw used out in the Denver area. They did all of their publicizing and marketing via an Instagram page, which is how I found them, but then used Google Groups to do administrative calendars and scheduling events. Some of the things that I'm currently looking around for resources on how to learn and upskill is, like I mentioned, motorcycling being one of them. Another thing is how to repair gear. So if anyone has good resources for how to learn more about gear repair, that's something both Matt and I have been really interested in. Matt has a sewing machine, and he and I have both kind of done DIY hacks on different things as needed over the years, whether it's a sunshade or rain guard, or even the screen, some of the screen material netting on one of his tents, and zipper pulls, different things like that we have modified or repaired ourselves. But how to repair technical gear is definitely a rabbit hole I'd like to pursue a little bit more myself. So I'm looking around for online resources for that one right now. I think another aspect of finding community in overlanding specifically to think about is what your focus is when going out with these folks. And so if you're looking for people to actually go out and overland with, thinking about and asking them about, looking for evidence of sort of where they spend their time and energy in terms of all the various activities that fall under the heading of overlanding. So are these folks that like to explore new roads or new trails, map new routes, find new campsites? Are they folks who prefer to go to known areas so that they can do some fun activities that are around there, maybe hiking, snowshoeing, etc.? Are these folks that really enjoy the camping aspect? So they want to focus on a really good camp meal, having a beer around the campfire, s'mores, just community around a campfire with sort of getting there being a secondary concern? Or are these folks that are really wanting to geek out on the technical vehicle skills and they want to test out all their gear? They want to go find a steep, rocky section and figure out how to rock crawl or overcome obstacles or maybe practice using recovery gear. That's Each one of these is kind of a whole separate trip, and you'd have a very different experience based on what the focus was going to be. So it's just something to keep in mind if you're looking for folks to actually go out overlanding with, to ask about the vibe of their current trips and sort of what they're envisioning, because it could look very different and may or may not be for you. Another area where I've seen folks build communities, especially online, is ironically around retailers or manufacturers of all of the gear that's needed to do these various adventurous activities, sports, etc. outside. And I think obviously they have a vested interest in building a community around their gear to get people to buy from them and increase their own base of users and consumers. But also, a lot of these businesses or manufacturers are started by people who really, really love this activity and found a common pain point or a problem that they wanted to solve. And so are super passionate about whatever that activity is, whether it's overlanding, bike packing, mountain biking. I've seen so many small manufacturers just get into these spaces, and it often comes out of a deep love of that activity and wanting to solve problems and share that expertise. And so even though maybe some of what they offer in terms of social media or pop-up events or demos, maybe it seems a little self-serving to you, but also recognize it as a gathering space for enthusiasts, whether it is online or in person. And it could be a great way to meet other people who are interested in those things. So I always pay attention to when people are doing things like Rigs and Coffee, which is just a casual overland meetup for looking at rigs and sipping coffee. And it's a pop-up event, and they're held all over the US. That happened a few times in Colorado. We went to a couple of those with folks that were really interested in getting to look at other folks' vehicle setups and rigs and outdoor gear, but also it was a cool way to meet people and get advice on where to go camping in that area. Another example I've seen is up in Bellingham, Washington. We've gone up there to camp near that area and go mountain biking. There's the Transition Outpost, which is owned by and run by the Transition Bicycle Manufacturing Company. And so you can rent or demo their latest bikes from the shop, which is cool if you've got folks along who don't have their own mountain bike or maybe want to try out something new. But it's also a bit of a community space in terms of they have some food and coffee available. You can sort of hang out at their shop. There's a place to play shuffleboard. They've got some retail gear available as well, which can be a great way of bringing people along who maybe are not as deep into the activity as you are and still being able to outfit them, whether it's with rentals or if you've completed your day and you're returning the bike and they want to get into it more, maybe it's time for them to purchase a little bit additional apparel or gear to get into that activity. So it's a really cool concept, I thought, for encouraging the love of what they're doing and focused on, which is bicycling, and kind of building out a community space around that. As I think through all of these examples of community and places both online and in person that you could get plugged into, one thing I'd encourage you to pay attention to as you're exploring different communities is how they welcome newcomers. It's something that I've paid attention to since I was little, and growing up, we moved a lot. I was always the new girl. And I really absorbed that so much, and it really made me notice how people, places, systems are set up to welcome or in subtle ways ignore newcomers. And this is something I've been thinking about and writing about a lot over the winter as well. if you're thinking about community and events, and particularly if you're thinking about building your own community, if you're finding that maybe this just doesn't exist in your area and you want to start something of your own, one resource I cannot recommend highly enough is the book, The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker. She also has a website, a newsletter. She shares tips and tricks on her Instagram as well for building community in the form of events. And this is something, whether you're thinking about planning an event of any kind, literally anything in life, I cannot recommend this book highly enough. It really raises some great questions and forces you to wrestle with what the purpose of the event is. And I think anybody who's doing both event or community organizing could really benefit from thinking about these things up front and thinking about how they will impact people's experiences, newcomers, people who are coming back, and sort of thinking about how you want them to leave your event or your gathering feeling. And in her book, Priya Parker does a great job of posing some really good questions for you to consider if you're the organizer. And even if you're not, maybe some questions to ask, things to look out for, and ways to think strategically about these things to make them better for everyone. And I think how we welcome newcomers is such an important one to think about, because it's really easy once you find a few friends who want to do the thing that you want to do, whatever activity, if it's overlanding or skiing or anything, to find a few friends, you get in a rhythm and you go do that thing. If you want to expand your community, or if you come across a new friend and you invite them in, it is so easy to forget what it was like to be new to the activity or new to that area or new to the group in general. And it can be really easy to take for granted all the little knowledge and tips and tricks and shortcuts and shorthand you may have developed with your group, whether it's abbreviations and how you talk about things, or even names for describing different things, whether it's a trail or a feature or a piece of gear. You might have your own language and not even realize it if you've gotten into that groove with your community. And so paying attention to how you welcome newcomers and whether you can make it approachable for them will really help you succeed in bringing those people back for a second or a third time. And that's really what it takes to build community, is not just showing up once, but being able to show up again and again, whether it's every year to an event like Overland Expo, or every month, maybe to a trail work party or volunteer thing, or maybe it's every week to some sort of shop ride or trailhead meetup. If you are cultivating a community of people that want to show up again and again, that's when you know you've been successful. And let me dive into a few examples, because I wish more people thought about this in terms of very practical things that you could do even before they got started with their event or their gathering. Because I think there's just so many opportunities missed a lot of the time for it to be really easy. It might be just explicitly calling out a couple of things up front when you meet with the group, if it's a weekly or a monthly thing. Just making sure to call out people that are new and welcome them, introduce them. Don't overwhelm them by expecting them to remember everyone's name, but just reintroducing yourself as often as needed. And maybe assigning them a buddy if it's, something like a trail work party or a trail ride or whatever. Maybe just saying, hey, I'm so-and-so and I'm going to hang out with you for a bit if that's okay, and just get to know you better and kind of help make sure that you feel welcomed. I think that's one of the easiest ways to welcome people into a group, is just to give them a little one-on-one attention from somebody in the group. That way they can feel welcomed, but not overwhelmed by the whole group focusing on them. Because I know for someone like me who's an introvert, it's basically my worst nightmare to be singled out in a circle of people and the spotlight put on me, have to share, my elevator pitch for who I am or why I'm there in 30 seconds to a group of people. That's my worst nightmare. But I love getting to connect one-on-one as we're walking down the trail, or biking down the trail and taking a break and chatting. It's those one-on-one times where I feel like I can make connections to the group. And so figuring out ways to shuffle the group so that you get different one-on-one time with different people. You're not stuck with the same person the whole time. I think that's also really important if you're trying to build community. Like I say, these are all just a few tips and tricks that I've noticed from my experiences in joining groups, but also highly recommend The Art of Gathering by Priya Parker if you're thinking about any event that you're doing. When it comes to community and finding community in the activity or overlanding space, whatever it is you're interested in, sometimes you might be looking around and just see that it does not exist where you are or in the form that you want it to take. And in that case, I'd encourage you to build your own. And I don't say that lightly. I think, at least for me, I certainly went through a period in my life where I had so much enthusiasm for different problems I wanted to solve, different ways I wanted to impact the world. And earlier in my career, I would have thought the solution was to start a nonprofit or to start a business, to start something, rally people around this particular problem or mission, and then solve it. But the older I've gotten and the more I've worked across different spaces, both in nonprofits and the business world, what I found to be true is that oftentimes there are people working on these same things or passionate about these same things that may already be gathering or already have gone through the trouble of setting something up, a way to engage with this activity in your area or a way to organize a group of people. And maybe they're just not getting the visibility they need, or maybe you just haven't heard about them. Maybe you haven't dug deep enough. And so please make sure you investigate all of the local resources, do some Googling, do some asking around. Oftentimes, places that sell outdoor gear or where people can buy stuff, whether it's for overlanding or skiing, whatever, that's a great place to kind of ask where local communities are, because the people that work at those places will probably know. But if you don't see anybody doing those things, especially in the fashion that you want to do them, then don't be afraid to start your own. It could be a great opportunity to bring other people out of the woodwork, out of their homes, out of the shadows, and doing these things that we love in community with others. And honestly, thinking through this, it's one of the reasons why I started this podcast. Because when I looked around online, I didn't see a lot of material that was super accessible to newcomers or people who were not familiar with the overlanding space. And I also didn't see a ton of women's voices elevated. And not that those are the only conversations we've had on this podcast. I really love uncovering the story behind everyone's fascination with the outdoors and sort of what brought them into it and what were some of the turning points in their life for embracing adventure. But I realized that I still had a unique perspective, and I really wanted to uncover the stories that not only resonated with me, but just maybe weren't getting as much attention due to various online algorithms on social media. And I'm so glad that I did, because it has forced me to reach out to women, to get to know other women in the space and learn and see what other resources are there. And so learning about things like the Ladies Off-Road Network, I met one of the organizers for that at the Overland Expo, learning about the history of Overland Expo itself and how it was really founded by a woman and always had women's education and programming as a part of it. That was really cool. And so all of these things have helped me actually feel more connected to the space once I started asking the questions and looking for it. Not to say that at all that it didn't exist. It was there. I just hadn't gone deep enough into the space, but also I think there was room for more spaces amplifying those voices. And that's one of the reasons why I've started the podcast. If you made it all the way to the end of today's episode and you have a favorite resource for finding community in overlanding or outdoor adventures, especially if it's a women's centered space, I'd love to hear it. Feel free to send me the link at Blue Yonder Jen on Instagram or Threads, and I'll post anything else that I come across at blueyonder-adventures.com. If you're curious to learn more specifically about overlanding, I'd recommend revisiting our first couple of episodes that talk about exactly what overlanding is and how to find campsites outside of established campgrounds. I'll be back next week with more, but in the meantime, hope to see you out in the wild blue yonder.